Hi guys, I am here to talk to you guys about two things. First, I have a really quick PowerPoint that I made to discuss just some brief overview things I want you to pay attention to in the road. Um, if we were to have read this book in class, we would have had 4 class periods to talk, and what we have instead is a quick video from me and a discussion board, which doesn't even begin to scratch the surface. That being said, if you're like feeling like you don't understand the movie, or if you were reading the book too, if those things are confusing, I hope this video helps a little bit, but also know that I had intended to spend a lot more time on this than we're able to. So if you feel like you're falling behind, that's probably true, and it's just inevitable based on the way we've had to change the course. So that's one thing. I want to talk about the film. And then I want to briefly show you what I want you to do instead of having class. So what you'll be doing for your online class, I'm going to show you that. I have it all prepped on Coursden, and I'll release it as soon as I post this video. So let's jump in. I have a very quick PowerPoint that's also available on Coursden. I think you should be able to see that now. I'm sharing my screen with you. Looks like maybe it's not fitting the whole PowerPoint there. Hopefully you can see most of it. But let's just jump in. I hope you guys were able to at least sort of enjoy this movie. I know it is really dark and almost kind of frightening to watch something like this at a time where we're experiencing kind of a global panic also. So I hope you were able to kind of like get past that as you watched the movie. So a couple of things here. Let me move to the next slide. There are 3 main tropes that I'm going to go over today. One is horror, one is religion, and the third is fatherhood. For Chris in particular, if he watches this, I'm just got me thinking about fatherhood. But those are the 3 main things I want to cover. If you watch the film, you know the horrifying element is obvious. The world has ended or is ending in some way. There's no food. There's no like infrastructure anymore. The father and the son are just kind of like fighting for themselves on the road, and there's all these really, really terrifying people. There's a religious element that may not be obvious to some of you, but I'll jump into that in my next couple of slides. And of course, the idea of fatherhood is pretty obvious, right? You have a father and son trying to survive and help each other. And, you know, there's a question of who's the most responsible of those 2 characters, the father or the son. Usually we see the son being more empathetic and the father being more responsible. But then there's a question of like morality here. Like, which one should you be? Is it every man for himself? Or are we supposed to still take care of each other in conflict like this? So I think that those major ideas about morality are applicable even today too with the COVID-19 scare. We've got people who are buying up all the toilet paper, and you can imagine them kind of as like the really bad guys in the road, right? They're keeping all the stuff for themselves. And then you have like doctors and nurses who are still going to work and risking their lives to take care of people, and they really honestly remind me of The Boy. So I know this was like a hard thing to watch because it's so traumatic, the movie, but it helps us kind of think about, I think, what's going on in a couple of different directions in the real world right now. I'll say this too. I read this book when I took my Survey American Lit class, however many years ago, and I wrote a paper about how this is a positive book, which you may be like, what? How is this positive? But I was like convinced, and still am, that this book is actually about goodness, even though it's horrifying. I'll try to convince you of that in the next few minutes, but I got a B on that paper, so maybe I was wrong, but I still stand by it, and this was years ago. I still think this book is, or this movie, whatever you want to call it, is a lot about goodness. I'll try to convince you of that in the next couple slides. So let's talk about horror at first. If that's a larger overarching theme for our course, the elements of horror that are present in this film are very different than what we've seen before. Part of what's horrifying in the text is this unknown catastrophe, the fear of the unknown. The fact that people are eating one another, so there's like this consumerist, if that's a metaphor for consumerism, like buying. This is taking it to the next level. We're willing to consume one another to sustain ourselves. And then there's the reality of, and the moral question of, for the father in particular, and whether he should murder his son or keep him alive, and whether he should murder himself. You know, there's like a really religious sort of thing that people feel about, you know, murder obviously, but suicide too. Lots of people think that suicide is another form of murder and that it's sin. But in this film, you see the father and you're like, just end it already. You got the 2 bullets, right? Like, you find yourself having that moral quandary. So the horrifying elements I think are outlined pretty well with just those 3 bullets, but of course there's even more. The fear of starvation is a specific kind of horror. And then 2, new territory. Like if you think about this, the father and son are in a new terrain, which reminds me of the Puritans when we talked about them in The Witch. They're coming over to the new land, and it's a new landscape that they're having to navigate. There are new rules. The father he talks about in the book, he doesn't say this as clearly in the film, but he's like, the fact that I still dream about the past is bad because the past is over. This is like brand new. You have to learn to live in a new way. So that's kind of another similar thing that we're seeing with these characters and previous characters that we've seen coming into like a new space. Obviously motherhood is present too. I'll let you think about that yourself, but like we've talked about motherhood so many times, and we have an absent mother here, which is worth considering. I'm going to jump to the next one, which is religion. Now, I've probably written 4 papers on this book, maybe more. I'm obsessed with it. I have read it in different classes and then just keep coming back to it. I have one that's all about the Coke that they share, that can of Coke. It's more present in the book, and I have like a whole paper that was inspired by that can of Coke. You don't want to read it, but it exists if you ever did. But anyway, another paper that I've written about this text in my senior American Lit class was that this book really is interested in religion in a way that's very different than we traditionally think about religion. Think about the people in The Witch. We had Puritans and they had God, right? And their fear was of upsetting God. What I suggest in this film is that the religion is not necessarily about a God. It's about their relationship to one another. Bear with me on this. So we're reading this book and film. It's considered postmodern, which is something you could look up if you're interested in, especially if you're an English major. But a postmodern text is usually, in a timeline of American literature, it's thought of as a genre that began, or an idea or a way of thinking about literature that began after World War II. If you know anything about World War II, it's a really bad time. More people were dying than Corona, let me tell you that. But we had this huge global catastrophe. And people really started writing and thinking about, if this really bad thing happened, does God even exist anymore? Which is, whoa, scary to think about. But that's really like a major tenet of postmodernism, is that, you know, God has just left us. And that's what these characters feel like in this movie. I have a quote here. The father says, if he is not the word of God, God never spoke. And he's talking about a son there. So he's referencing his son, his relationship to his son, as God's voice. So like their relationship is what sustains him in a religious sense. I've got a couple more pieces of evidence that I think support that idea. The son prays to the people who left them food in the bunker. He doesn't like bow his head necessarily, but he kind of does. Like he says, we need to thank them, and he offers this sort of actual prayer to them. So he also praised his father after his death. I have a couple quotes from the movie that I'm going to read at the end of my PowerPoint to show, or from the book, I'm sorry, to show you that more clearly. And this is a quote from Eli at the bottom. He said, whoever made humanity will find no humanity. So he's talking about, if there is a God who made us, he made us human with like some kind of moral impulse to protect one another or be careful and nice, he's saying that's not here anymore. So the idea of God is gone, and instead what's been replaced by that connection is like interpersonal thing, which is really different from the other ways that we've thought about religion. That being said, if the witch and the Puritans were horrified of God punishing them, because that's the force of religion, what changes if religion is interpersonal, the horror is what we can do to one another. Does that make sense? So now it's about like, oh gosh, we could actually eat one another for food if things got to it. We could actually steal at everybody's belongings. You remember that guy at the end? He was like stealing all of their stuff, and then Papa leaves him totally without clothes or anything. They're like stealing from one another. How horrifying is it that we could hurt one another? So that idea of like fear and religion is really connected here to the witch. God as the fear versus like horror between ourselves if religion is becoming interpersonal. Jumping into the fatherhood thing really quick. I said this a minute ago. There's this tension of like the father is moral or amoral. Is he selfish? Is he responsible? he says, I'm the one who has to worry about everything, but the boy goes, no, I'm the one. And the reason I think he says that is because, yeah, the father is like thinking about the day to day. Like, how do we get food today? But the boy is the one who's like, how do we make sure that we're still the good guys? You know, he asks that over and over. He says, how do we make sure we're carrying the fire? Which I think is implicit for like, I don't know, some goodness or like hope. I don't know exactly what the fire means. You could speculate in the discussion board, but I think he's the one who's concerned with protecting them and making sure that they stay good. If he's if humans and their relationships with one another is the God or the religion of this world, then he's like, I'm the one that's making sure like that we're still saved, that we're still like considering, you know, God here. I'm going to skip quickly. I want to go to that screen in a second. Let me show you the one final piece. I'm oh, sorry, I gotta like find it. Ooh, okay, I'm linking this article. You'll see it at the end of the PowerPoint. I've linked some stuff for you to look at. But this article, I don't have my book here with me of the road. I left it at my office, and I can't get in my office right now because, first of all, they rekeyed it, and I don't have a key, which is insane, but also the campus is closed. So even if I were to sneak on campus, I don't have a key. Anyway, it's a longer story. But I want to talk really quickly about this idea about prayer and interpersonal like faith. So this is a quote from the end of the book. It says, when the father is dying, which I know is really sad, but he says, if I'm not here, you can still talk to me. You can talk to me and I'll talk to you. You'll see. The boy said, will I hear you? Yes, you will. You have to make it like you have to make it like talk that you imagine, and you'll hear me. You have to practice. Just don't give up. And then what's even more compelling is, you know, the boy gets with that family at the end, which I think is a happy ending. Some people say, oh no, they're just going to eat him later. But I'm like, I think that's happy. Anyway, the mother of that family, this is a quote from the book. She would talk to him about, sometimes about God. He tried to talk to God, but the best thing was to talk to his father. And he did talk to him, and he didn't forget. The woman said that was all right. She said that the breath of God was his breath, yet though it passed from man to man all of time. Now, the movie doesn't use this quote. It's my favorite quote from the book, which is why I had to show it to you, because I think it really helps to emphasize that man pass from man to man is kind of like the new religion that Cormac McCarthy has sort of envisioned for this postmodern or apocalyptic landscape. That's why I think it's positive, because there is some sort of hope that we, even though humans can be the most horrifying thing to one another, then we also have ability to protect one another and love one another and all that kind of good stuff. So like the warm and fuzzies are present in this, even though the cannibalism is also present. To bring this home, I have some notes from, that's what this last PowerPoint slide was, bringing it to the coronavirus. I have a few links here that you could look at. First of all, in case I forget, the bottom link is just a YouTube video that's a interview with Cormac McCarthy and Oprah. I think it's the only interview he's basically ever done, and it's with Oprah, so there's that. But the other things I wanted to show you. So I just read an article. I didn't put this on the PowerPoint because I read it a few minutes after I made it. This woman went into the grocery store and was coughing on groceries because she thought she had corona and was literally like just being an asshole and coughing on groceries. They had to throw them away. There's been another case of someone coughing on an officer and said, oh, you're going to die now because I have corona. That's insane. Like, and that's one small thing that we see people being like horrifying to each other. Coughing on groceries. Why would you do that? But on the other hand, in the midst of this whole crisis, I want to show you something. This is from West Georgia. Our school, the theater department is actually hand sewing masks for people who are working at Tanner, because y'all know there's like a shortage of masks, so that's terrifying. But then I also have another article linked, Random Acts of Kindness in Atlanta. This is the little boy who used his birthday money to like buy food for people. And then I also linked the Tanner Heroes site. You can look at this on your own time, but it's just showing the folks who are like, we work for you, stay home for us, that kind of thing. People are like going above and beyond to protect one another with all of the stuff that's going on. So it reminds me of that tension in the road, right? The worst of us, the horrifying, and the good. And then who has what elements? Does the father have both elements? Is the boy purely good? Will he learn to be bad? Are the people who are bad able to be good again? It's a question. So that wraps up my discussion of the road. This is going to cut me off at 15, so I'm going to go ahead and pause the video. I'll restart one that explains your homework and it'll be much shorter. So I'll be right back.